Good day, everyone. My name is Rebecca Lilly with the International Association for Energy Economics. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar entitled, How Does Digitalization Transform the Energy Sector? We are grateful to our moderator and distinguished speakers for today's timely discussion. First, a little bit about the International Association for Energy Economics. We are the largest association specializing in the field of energy economics and provide a forum for the exchange of ideas, experience, and issues among professionals interested in the field. The organization produces 2 professional journals, a newsletter, and holds conferences and virtual presentations along with a host of other products and services you can find at our website at www.iaee.org. If you're not already a member of the association, we welcome you to join. A few housekeeping matters in regard to today's webinar before I hand things over to our moderator. First, this webinar is being recorded for those that cannot participate in today's live event. If you have questions for the panelists, please click the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom window and type your question. We've allocated time at the end of the webinar to read and answer them. And now I would like to introduce you to our moderator, Isabella Ruble. She is the CEO of Clover University and an economist at the U.S. Department of Energy. Isabella, over to you.
Good morning. Welcome to our audience and to our distinguished speakers. In today's webinar, we will discuss how digitalization transformed the energy industry. We will hear about what digitalization actually is, what it means in the renewable energy industry and in the oil and gas industry, what kind of economic drivers exist that favor digitalization, why it is not happening at a faster pace, what its importance is for energy markets and the energy transition, and finally, how the use of drones and satellites can provide more transparency in the energy sector. I'm honored and delighted to welcome Dr. Anna Bruhl, who is the Director of Energy Leadership at the Clean Energy Leadership Institute, Dr. Satyam Priyadarshi, who is the Technology Fellow and Chief Data Scientist at Halliburton, and Matt Stanley, who is the Partnerships Lead for the Middle East for Kepler. Let's get started. Dr. Bruhl, please, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you, Isabella and the IAE for convening us today. My name is Anna Bruhl, and in addition to working at Clean Energy Leadership Institute, I teach energy economics at Johns Hopkins University, as well as AI and business applications at the Estonian Business School. Today, a lot of the information that you will hear me talk about is based on the research with my esteemed co-authors, Shema Evli, Dawood Ansari, who are all based in Berlin. I'm going to start my presentation. Slideshow. All right. And for some reason, I don't see my notes again. Digitalization is not on my side today. I apologize for this. Yeah, so I do not see my notes, which is unfortunate, even though we tried this thing here. Yes, awesome. Thanks so much for your patience. So today I would like to frame the discussion of the digitalization of the energy sector in the framework of long-term energy scenarios, which are the visions of the future that were developed by a variety of organizations that you can see on the screen, ranging from energy companies to consultancies, think tanks, and international organizations. These outlooks have incredible influence, read widely all over the world by CEOs, policymakers, and other decision makers. So how do these outlooks view artificial intelligence and other advanced digital tools? What do they see as their role in a decarbonized world? First, it's useful to understand that these reports employ different methodologies and have different goals. So some outlooks are focused on modeling the future and trying to forecast it with the highest mathematical precision possible. Scenario planning, in contrast, which is known as the Shell method, is looking at narratives and aim to understand the uncertainty and explain this to policymakers, recognizing also that the pathways of the past might not be the best ways to think about the future. And a lot of my presentation will circle around this idea. And backcasting outlooks set a future goal, such as how to get to net zero by 2050 and work backwards. A lot of scenarios combine features from all of these approaches. One of the sobering facts of reading through scenarios was recognition that with high probability we will not be meeting Paris targets. Let's all see the recent cover of The Economist. There are also some scenarios that look into Paris compliant futures such as Shell Sky. DNVGL in their 2020 post-pandemic scenario stated that with sufficient scale, technology could deliver a Paris compliant future. But to appreciate the scale, I'm sharing the slide by the IEA, which summarizes the speed of transition that needs to be in place to reach net zero emissions by 2050. In short, we're not building new energy infrastructure nearly quick enough, and our existing energy infrastructure locks us into a given path. Moreover, IEA estimates that almost half of the emission reduction technologies are still in the lab, so they're not commercial as of today. My co-authors and I compiled a collection of 120 energy outlooks because we had so much time on our hands during the pandemic that describe the energy pathways in the coming decades. Each of these publications make assumptions about economic and population growth, trade flows, energy intensity of the GDP, and so on. There are common features in these scenarios that predict high share of renewable energy, increasing energy efficiency, high degree of electrification, and the need to employ carbon negative or carbon neutral technology. So no real surprises here. Now, it's a question to the audience. If we do a simple count of technologies, what do you think are the most frequently mentioned technologies in these compiled scenarios? I will give our audience a chance to chime in here just for a second. Feel free to drop your assumptions in the chat. So the question is, based on these 120 outlooks, which technologies do you think were mentioned the most? Are there any takers? All right, battery storage, here we go. And this is a very good answer, CCUS. I'm waiting for the technology, solar, that has been mentioned the most. So the one with the biggest share of space on that word cloud. Any other guesses? All right, electric, here we go. Energy efficiency. So all of these answers are correct. However, gas, good old natural gas and storage were most prominently mentioned technologies in all of these 120 outlooks. Another important observation is that most of these publications stay squarely within the probable space in this scenario cone, which I'm showing here, often ignoring, this is the probable space, so to say, often ignoring wildcards, which we know might happen as a negative or a positive shock to our energy system. What I'm trying to argue here is that we're not paying enough attention to wildcards or dark horses or gray or white swans, which might center around large-scale deployment of a general purpose technology or a GPT that will reshape the energy system as we know it. In the world that witnessed both a pandemic and a war in Europe in the past 2 years, consideration of not so likely events should find a new relevance. I suggest that the artificial intelligence might be the next GPT with a wide range of applications in energy and beyond. And OECD tends to agree with me. Now, we keep working with our scenarios, and we investigated the digital technologies that were integrated in these scenarios. It is sobering to know that only 18 out of 120 of these outlooks mention AI at all. And those that do only mention it in passing or as a buzzword. In other words, if if AI is the next general purpose technology, we're not giving it enough attention in our long-term scenarios. Additionally, only 7 outlooks considered one of the other keywords in the description, and while acknowledging the importance of these technologies, the discussion remains pretty high level. You see some quotes from here, such as by 2040, energy systems are highly digitalized and AI enabled. So I hope that Ment and Satyam would be talking about more details how it can actually get there. As the next step, my co-authors and I, there's another word cloud that describes digitalization, and not surprisingly, the most used word is digitalization. The outlooks tend to mention technologies that are somewhat mature, so again, within the center of the scenario cone, and not necessarily venture into investigating low maturity technologies with a lot of promise. As the next step, my co-authors and I solicited expert opinions about AI and digital technologies that are most likely to help us achieve net zero visions by 2050. We wanted to know what AI tech is on their minds, and what do they think were the technologies with highest impact, but also mature technologies, and whether they are likely to be accepted by the general public. First, I'd like to present a list of technologies with high technological maturity and high social acceptance. I do think that these are the usual suspects that are often mentioned in scenarios, and we're mostly certain that they will help the world use its resources more wisely. However, I find the most interesting list are the AI technologies that have high impact, but are likely to witness social acceptance issues or are still unproven. For example, our experts had reservations about the idea that each person could have a CO2 budget that will be monitored by the AI, which gives off the big brother is watching you kind of vibe. And similarly, in the US, there is a renewed interest in geoengineering, which could help us refreeze the ice caps, but this technology is still low maturity. Now, to sum up, the world will have a very hard time meeting the Paris targets, as we're still facing increased emissions, while we need to be reducing our emissions every year. And in order to achieve net zero, the world might need a positive shock, and the AI might be that technology to provide this positive shock to the system. And when we think about the AI, we can put it into 3 different buckets. So the first bucket are AI applications that are already mainstream or entering the mainstream in the next 5 to 10 years. The second set of AI technologies are high impact, but they need that license to operate. Given the threat of climate change, it's a question whether the public is ready to give up some of the privacy and freedoms in order to have these technologies implemented. And finally, there are multiple promising technologies that haven't been demonstrated yet. Should the world invest into these, knowing that we have other pressing issues such as global poverty, alleviation, and so on? I will leave the audience with these questions and will yield the floor back to Isabella.
Our next speaker is Dr. Satyam Priyadarshi. And Dr. Satyam, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Isabella. Let me share my screen and let me know. All right, good morning, everyone. If anybody is from different time zones, good evening. So it's a very interesting topic. The world still talks about digitalization, and I feel that it's, in my personal view, that it is actually the smallest part of the economic landscape. We need to go beyond digitalization for energy industry to be resilient. So we'll talk about some of those terms. So I'm here because of many people, after my parents, of course, my teachers, and a lot of people that I've worked over the last 30 years. both in academics and industry. And so what I present to you is summary of some of the work that I've done with so many people. And thanks for all of you at IAE to attend, and thanks Isabella, Dr. Isabella, to invite me. My background, I'm the managing director for India Center for Halliburton, as well as technology fellow and chief data scientist at Halliburton here in US. But also I've been part of SPE, which is the Society for Petroleum Engineers. Of course, many of the organizations like that. And my background is in quantum theoretical chemistry, in fact, very close to what today people would call artificial photosynthesis. I was trying to understand how chloroplast works, applying quantum mechanics to it. And then I've worked in many fields of science, nanotechnology, DNA, etc. And then today, I just play with data. It doesn't matter where it comes from, what domain it is, and bring that experience to integrate how to look at challenging problems in the energy industry. And I'm also faculty at a couple of universities. Now, why are we talking about this, right? The biggest question that we have is actually this. We need energy at the lowest cost per unit that is sustainable and resilient for current and future needs. And we all know that, you know, the cost or the price of the energy is not in control, is not 100% market driven, right? Depending on what article you read, somebody will say 30%, somebody will say 40%. It's a market plus geopolitical. But the cost is something that is in control. And the only way you can actually keep reducing the cost is if you know how to look at the data. And this becomes even more critical, whether it is oil and gas or any other industry, because we are all talking about net zero, energy transition, et cetera, but this landscape of energy transition is going to be very complex. So I use this picture to show that, you know, which energy source, what consumption, and what energy transition maturity is. And I purposely put the transition word in a quote, because are we really transitioning? Do you think that in our lifetime we will get away from oil and gas, right? You know, currently, one of my coworkers has written a nice paper on it. And currently we use something around 8,000 metric ton equivalent of oil and gas. To replace all that, we would need hundreds of geothermal plants, plus hundreds of nuclear plants, plus solar plants. So, you know, if you look at all the energy sources that Anna was talking about, we need a combination of all that. So we are not really fully transitioning. We will have an energy mix, right? And that energy mix will look like this: something for US, something for India. We may be in a different place. Now, that's where your challenge is to figure out, how do I reduce the cost? Because you see, in principle, is it all tenable? Because what are the things we are talking about? We want energy to be, it is essential that we all know, right? It has to be sustainable and resilient. But if cost is high, then it's not tenable. So when do we achieve energy at rest? And in order to do that, we have to really increase our digital maturity. But the challenge is, if you look just at oil and gas industry, for example, you know, data drives digital. And if you look at it, the data is in silos. And I think some of the things that Dr. Anna was talking earlier will actually be behind the scenes. You will see that one of challenges when we talk about AI. Some people say AI is important. AI is not important, because if you don't understand the data, you can't talk about AI. So that's the biggest challenge. So if you look at the industry, you know, a lot of time is wasted in terms of ownership of the data, multiplicity of data. And of course, most of the energy industry doesn't have data provenance, especially when it comes to operational data and things like that. But if you look at it, what's happening in the industry 4.0 era, that we have industrial IoT sensors, we have drones, we have wearables, we have fiber optic connectivity, we have cloud, fog, and networks, blockchain. Now, all these things are going to explode the data that we are going to have. And this is for all areas of energy industry, whether it's geothermal, whether it's drilling, whether it's solar, right? I don't know if you look at, say, go to Middle East, we had some of the biggest solar farms, but the problem is when the sand comes, now you suddenly need robots to clean them. So you suddenly have a data explosion there, right? One is this energy data. The second is when do I go and clean the solar panels? So you see, data comes in, you have to look at a picture in a holistic way, and this data explosion is going to happen. If we don't really tame that, then we keep increasing our capital waste, of course, data waste, and the time waste. So we have to really figure out this digital maturity curve, and that is essential. Over the last 9 years, especially in our industry, I've been with Halliburton, we built this first center of excellence for big data, data science, and digital. And I can tell you it's been a journey, how to tame it, and how do we actually really create value from it at different aspects of it. Now, some of these things, whether it's the implementation of the cloud technology or whether it is a methodology called smart transform, but the foundation lies in what is called data is a critical asset. And one has to look at it from a holistic point of view, not in this small silo. And when you actually applied it to a platform technology, whether it's cloud or hybrid cloud or private cloud or whatever the terms you want to use, but you have to leverage the platform technology because we all live on a platform. All of us are on a platform of a Zoom right now, but all of us have a cell phone, and the same cell phone has so many other applications of different kinds. And that is how you actually start leveraging it. But if once we do that, then we can really talk about the various aspects of digitalization and digital transformation. So in this whole journey, it is a very simple, I put this in a very simple graph. Economic value and digital maturity is very simple. First is the digitization. I think there are no companies in the world, especially in energy sector, which can claim 100% digitization. There is one, I know, a small operator in UAE who has actually 100% digitized, but nobody else. So we can talk about digitalization, but we have not even completed the first step of digitization. But digitalization is a step where you leverage the digital data to improve a single workflow or a process so that you have some efficiency gains or accuracy gains or some change in revenue. But what we need in order to be a real player in this whole energy mix landscape is a transformation of the industries, whether it is solar, whether it's renewable, whether it's oil and gas. And that we have very few people talk about it, because one is unstructured data. When they come, then automatically you are back into digitalization phase, because the most of that cannot be tapped. And then eventually, when the energy mix is really understood, that's when you actually can do cost optimization of energy. And that is what I call digital disruption. So many of these things I have written in various articles, and those 2 books, they are not mine, but somebody else's. They used to be free, but those red color books, you can actually go find them. But I've written some of these things. We should really be talking about digital transformation. Digitalization is this one step below, and that people understand a little bit, but not fully. And there is a survey that I did some time back, and I call it digital minefield, the understanding of this. I know Dr. Anna made one comment about AI. Some people said it's important, some said not. The thing is, all my undergraduate students will tell you that AI is not a technology. It is just a subject, right? We never say that we are eating chemistry, we are wearing chemistry, right? So it's an application of a subject, topics of that subject that we are talking about, because there is nothing called a single AI. And hence that's a confusion. Especially I know in oil and gas industry, almost every algorithm that has been developed in the last 50 years has been actually used, but they will never call it AI. They will say, oh, I use neural networks, I use classification, I use clustering, or whatever, right? They will talk about the 2 layers below the subject. So hence the confusion, right? But it is an important aspect of it, because in today's data world, we can actually leverage those algorithms very effectively because of the cloud computing paradigm. And I think we will see application of it pretty significant in energy industry. And I can tell you from our own experience, we have seen growth every year in the last 3 years. With that, I will pause here, and then we can have the discussion further.
We will have quite a few questions. Our next speaker is Mr. Matt Stanley. And Matt Stanley, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Isabella, and thank you, Dr. Anna, Dr. Satyam. Very interesting presentations. Yeah, as Isabella said, my name's Matt. I run the partnerships, I run the relationships in the Middle East for Kepler. We are a data company, facilitate transparency in the commodity sectors. We cover various commodities from grains and coal to LNG. I'm primarily focused on the energy markets. Me personally, I've been in the Middle East for 10 years. I've been in the oil market 22 years. And before you ask, yes, I did start when I was 10. Thanks for being concerned about that. And yeah, look, this year I decided I was trading. I started at Trafigura. I was on the gasoline bench. And I was lucky enough to live in different parts of the world. And then the last 10 years, when I moved to the Middle East, I've been broking physical cargoes and hedging paper derivatives, etc. And then I moved to Kepler. They asked me to join them in June this year. And I don't think I've got off an aeroplane since I asked them to join. So well, COVID was good for my marriage. The last 3 months haven't particularly been because I haven't seen anyone. But yeah, look, in essence, you know, what we do as Kepler and you know, what I've tried to do within the last, 10 years, especially in the Middle East, is increase market transparency to make it easier for people to trade, to identify arbitrage opportunities, look at trading patterns, and essentially how a trader can make money. And I don't know if many of you are aware, don't worry, I'm not selling anything. I've left that particular part of the business to other people. I'm just purely on the relationship side. So I just wanted to give a background for those who don't know what we do, because everything that Dr. Ann and Dr. Satyam have said is effectively what we do as one in terms of aggregating new technology, AI, drone technology, satellites. You know, we have over 5,000 data sources as a company. We actively use drone technology, which I will show you in a moment, to identify storage levels across the world. And it's, we're a rapidly growing company with just under 300 people now. When I started in June, we were just over 200. So we raised just over $200 million of private equity earlier on this year. So we're rapidly growing, and we're adapting with an energy market that, in essence, is struggling. I was in Abu Dhabi last week for ADIPEC, which was chaos, but it was very good because, you know, the zero carbon argument has to happen. It's, you know, COP27 is going on in Egypt at the moment. But the one thing that has really changed since this time last year when I was in Abu Dhabi was that it has to be hand in hand with an energy market that still is reliant on fossil fuels. You know, Dr. Anna said that, you know, on that cloud, the thinking cloud, that gas is still on the majority of people's minds. Look, I was born and raised in London, and I've got a lot of friends still there, and, you know, people are struggling. You know, the costs of energy is a real concern, and especially in the face of a recession. The Middle East is fairly sheltered from it because, look, fundamentally, high oil prices are good for fiscal budgets within the GCC core. That is good for reinvestment in in all sectors. But, you know, the UAE are proud of how they have built up such a successful economy on an oil-based one. And the growth is still there. ADNOC want to increase oil production to 5 million barrels. Not by 2030, but now by 2025. So that's an increase of 30%. That needs a lot of investment, and they're not shy of making that point clear. You know, the dynamic of the group is very aggressive, but it's one that's supportive for an energy market that needs it. But look, I'll stop blabbing, and I'll show you what our system looks like for those that don't know. Let me just make sure I share the right screen. Right, there we go. So I hope you can all see that. If you can't, then just shout at me. Okay, good. Yeah, essentially, this is our system. It's a web-based terminal. I know that looks like a child's drawing, but which it might be. But essentially, what you can see there, a green arrow is a vessel that is loaded. An orange one is one that's in ballast, is returning back to its port. And some of the yellow ones you see down here, just by southern India, they're yellow and they're open vessels. These are oil import terminals, and the green ones are refineries or export terminals. Now, this is it in a snapshot. And look, I know I should be a tech guy because I work for a tech company, but I'm not. So please bear with me. I don't want the questions being, why is this guy on there talking about technology when he doesn't know his PIN code? Right. But look, essentially, I just want to focus on Fujairah because I'm sitting here in Dubai, and the vast majority of Middle East crudes obviously comes through the Straits of Hormuz, you can see here. And then this congestion that you can see here is the Fujairah anchorage. So look, essentially these are AIS signals that the vessel sends and pings all the time. And we can track it, and it pings every 10 minutes. I mean, the last time we saw the destination was on the 8th of November. Sorry, excuse me, that's its ETA. She's in Fujairah right now. You can see this boat is called Princess Natalie and is operated by a company called Gulf Marine Management. So it's just, this essentially is a snapshot, but you can see how congested Fujairah is. This one here is obviously next door to each other. There's a small STS, a ship-to-ship operation that's going on. But I don't want to get into too much detail on that, but just want to focus on when we're talking about drone and satellite technology that we look at. So this is the Fujairah port. I was there 3 weeks ago. Just there was a Gulf Intelligence Forum, which was good. So you can see it here. It's effectively Google Maps, but you know, we add on a lot more data. This is the Uniper refinery, which is currently up for sale actually because of the issues that Uniper have had throughout the course of this year with $44 billion of losses they reported on Friday, which is, I can't believe anyone can lose that amount of money. But it's not their fault. It's external factors. Unfortunately, that is what has been driving markets this year, and external forces that no one saw. And Uniper, which is part of this energy transition that we were talking about, they have a green agenda going forward. They're Germany's biggest utility provider. Having a refinery they own in the Middle East probably doesn't add to that green argument too well when you're talking to some investors about renewable energy. So Uniper is being sold. Now, you can just see here, so this is where we have our terminals mapped. So at the moment, these are all the berths in FOTT, which is the Fujairah oil tanker terminal. And then we've just had this boat, she's on the berth at the moment, the MT Ocean Dream, and she's going to be loading soon. That's one of the berths that's occupied in Fujairah, and then you've got the others as well. Many, and it's all one connected terminal. So in terms of the drone and the satellite technology we have for monitoring quantities, you can see these tanks here, 8 tanks. So this is the new Adcop Fujairah export terminal. So this is all the Murban, some Apazacum, some Das, etc. And all of this is piped from the Gulf by the Straits of Hormuz, and it's piped down through Fujairah, and this is strategic reserve. But you can see here, so the way that this is a tank that can take 1 million barrels of crude. They're 8 huge tanks that they carved out the mountain for, and this one's 98% full. Now we get our information from satellites, from shadowing, based on the floating roofs for the crude oil tanks. Drone technology is not allowed in Fujairah. We use it extensively in Cushing, which is the WTI hub in the States. And we can look at things through thermal imaging, general floating roofs, and how much is in the tank. And look, all of this, it looks great, and you look at it, you're like, wow, that's really good. What do we do with it, right? The data is only so good in much as you can translate it into something that a trader can take on a tangible basis and take value from it, as they must do, and put it into a trading methodology or whatever they're looking to do. So we this year acquired a research company, a very well-known one in Austria called JBC Energy. So we now have a team of 35 guys on our research team, and they look at the terminal, they look at flows, they look at what is poignant in today's market. Like Anna said, I say it again, gas is an increasingly, since this time last year, the European gas crisis has been on the front of everyone's mind. That has obviously meant that some power stations in Europe are switching from gas to oil, depending on feedstock costs. And then we write a piece on that. So I'm going to share another screen with you now. We recently did a PowerPoint presentation for a major European oil refiner. I won't tell you the name, but these are the questions that we get asked. And I'm not going to go through all of it with you, don't worry. And the people who wrote this have got much bigger brains than me, but feel free to ask any questions you like. But this is essentially what we do and why we do it. You know, transparency in oil markets, when I first started, wasn't necessarily an encouraged thing, because a lot of oil traders like ambiguity. You know, you don't make money buying a cargo from BP and selling it to Shell. You make money buying from a country that can't really export it and you sell it to a country that can't really afford it. That's where the margins are. And digitalization and how that is working hand in hand with technology and investments is great. And what we do with the system is leverage that as much as we can, talk to our clients. And, you know, we have hundreds of clients now. And and we listen to them, and it's an ever-changing, ever-adapting place that we are in, and oil traders are in, refiners are in. So we have to move and we have to adapt with those all the time. So this is essentially what we do. And you can see here, I mean, obviously Russia has been the big talking point this year, you know, on the moral compass as well as the energy one. You know, it doesn't take all of this is public information. We just aggregate it. But if you use an example of what's going on with Russian energy, you know, India, third biggest crude oil importer in the world, they imported 1 million barrels of Russian crude oil in February this year. Last month, they imported 40. So, you know, it's changing trade patterns and flows is what we look at through the technology that we've got and the digitalization of certain parts of the oil market. But essentially, it's, you know, you go where the cheapest source is, and we can evidence that. I'm sure there will be loads of questions. I've got a few myself on these slides, but I can't ask that to myself. But yeah, look, again, thanks for the invite to talk. Any questions about Kepler or what's going on with trade flows, just let me know. But thanks, Isabella.
Insightful presentation, amazing stuff, amazing pictures. So now we're opening the floor for questions. So I would like to ask our audience to think about questions for our speakers. You can put them in the chat and we will try to answer them. In the meantime, I have a few questions that came up to me while listening to all of this and waiting for our audience to come up with their questions. So one was more like of a remark, and that is, you know, when we think of ways in which, you know, we think about the energy transition, right? And at the same time that we want to transition to a cleaner energy future, we have to realize that we are right now, the world is consuming, or the world energy consumption is relying for 78% on fossil fuels. And that's a reality that we cannot deny. And so when we think about energy prices, like Matt mentioned, and people suffering from higher energy prices, I think of several things that one can think about here. And one is, how can digitalization aid this energy transition? And I think Matt opened some eyes here, you know, by providing this transparency. And also Dr. Satyam, like by providing some transparency in what's actually going on. And also when you think about the electricity grid, for example, or electricity provision, right? And adding more renewables. We need a lot of investment in infrastructure, right? If that planning can go on with, you know, more consideration of data, with better planning, we can maybe take into consideration the importance of energy prices for populations. And I think that the third and last argument before I come to the audience question is, Dr. Anna mentioned, you know, the social, what is it called? The social credit system. And, you know, whether or not we're willing to have that. And I think that's also something Western governments need to think about, whether we want to become like China or, you know, whether we should be proactive and think about that ahead of time, how we can handle these kind of things and what can legislation do, and at what point legislation should come in, because we don't want to cut, you know, innovation on the one hand, but we don't want to be too late either. So with that, let me look at some audience question. So there is a question for Dr. Ruble. Given that we just learned from Professor Priyadarshi that AI is not a technology, according to your research, what is the most promising AI application for reducing emissions?
So I'm happy that this question was asked, because I wanted to clarify. AI is a term that you usually throw around to get attention from decision makers, because this is what they want to talk about. And these are the reports that we're investigating. So there were reports that communicated with the general public and decision makers, as I mentioned, CEOs. What Dr. Satya mentioned are technologies under the hood. And obviously, if we did keyword search on clustering, natural language processing, or all the multitude of like deep reinforcement learning, all of the different methodologies that are implemented in the AI, we wouldn't have found much. So our search was mostly on applications such as smart metering and so on. So we tried to get to technological names and called AI just like an umbrella term. So I'm happy to make my presentation available in the slide that I shared that said high impact, high technological maturities. There were a list of technologies, 11 of them, that would answer your questions, which are the ones that have highest technological maturity and highest social acceptance.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ruble. So I see another question here for Dr. Priyadarshi. What are the critical factors for accelerating digitalization and the digital transformation?
You see, a couple of things. One, I think I mentioned briefly, one is that platform technology, adoption of platform, whichever, whether it's cloud, fog, and whether it's hybrid or public or private cloud, depending on what in an industry and what place in the world we are talking about, that is one. The second one is very important, is the actual talent. I think very few people talk about talent in energy industry, right? It's a big challenge. Of course, for oil and gas, most people know that we lost a lot of highly qualified people since 2014. And as we all know, even in US, so many universities shut down their programs for petroleum engineering. And so now there is no pipeline, correct? And this is true for pretty much everywhere in the world. Very difficult to find highly qualified or educated people in this industry. Not only oil and gas, it's actually true for renewable as well. Now, question is, how do we prepare that talent? And then one is the domain talent, and second on top of it is the digital talent. How many of the people have been actually trained on digital technology? 80%, I can guarantee 80% of the people working on, say, digital technology, which is, say, big data technologies or data science, 80% of them are self-trained. Industry hasn't invested in them, right? So for example, and Matt can probably correct me, if you go on a ship or on a refinery, they will certainly train the technician that how to operate equipment or a ship or something, right? Or in drilling world, they will send a driller to train. Or in geophysics, they will send a reservoir engineer to train how to do simulations. But when it comes to digital technologies, that's afterthought, right? So, and then partnership with universities is lacking in terms of what projects. If you see a lot of the people who we hire, most of the people we hire, what projects have they done on digital? They have analyzed some social media posts, some news articles for their using algorithms of AI. But what we need is people who should understand energy. So energy industry hasn't been very forthcoming in terms of providing the data on which they can be trained. So if really we want to be successful in this, we have to really look at a bigger picture in terms of talent and how the talent can be tapped. trained and then leveraged, because the speed is very important in this digital transformation. And as both Dr. Anna and Matt are saying, they look at the bigger picture, like he's looking at satellite data from a holistic point of view and then looking at how it moves, right? This holistic view of things is needed for the energy industry, especially in the energy mix, when it comes to how much of geothermal is there, how much is, and I think Dr. Isabella, you also mentioned that, like, how is that energy mix going to be, right? And this will be a dynamic system. It's not going to be static. And if as the weather or climate changes, your performance of various systems is going to change in a given specific location. How are you looking at it? And that requires a significant amount of talent besides the technology. And that is the only way, that is one of the critical part of this acceleration.
One of the arguments that I actually heard through the years from industry is that you get engineers, and you correct me if that's wrong, you get engineers from all kinds of fields who are perfect, but they're not trained on the data. And that, you know, the way you proceed, for example, in oil and gas right now is very different from, let's say, 20, 30 years ago. Nowadays, you go there with a computer and you need to be data savvy. And that's sometimes missing, even if they're very good in whatever engineering field they graduated in, right? So when I listen to you now, it's like, yes, that's what I heard from industry over the last couple of years. Absolutely. So I have another question. You mentioned that, you know, many articles mentioned the failure of many digital projects. What are the root causes of failures in digital projects?
Yes. So you can read articles saying that say 20%, 80% of big data projects fail, or 60% of AI projects never make to production. Some articles like that you will see in various magazines and places, right? But is that really true? I don't think so. But the failure typically happens because of the leadership. You see, we are not building dashboards here. Dashboards are important, but here we are trying to find an innovative solution, or we are trying to optimize a workflow, or we are trying to automate so that someday we can build digital twins. Now that these things require time. In the industry hasn't really integrated data in last 50 years, but they want suddenly a result out of data in like 6 weeks. That cannot happen, right? It's not a dashboard, just putting some pictures on it and you are done. That's not what it is. It is the combination of domain and data combined in a holistic view that takes time. So leadership is one of the biggest reasons. Second is this technologies are evolving fast. Industry 4.0 technologies, if you look at the stack, is evolving very fast and speed. Like most of the energy industry, for example, talks about a big data technology called Hadoop, which is pretty much outdated in many ways. It's 15 years old, right? And if you look at the Silicon Valleys of the world, they are using modern technologies even to improve the performance and accuracy of things. So when do we be ready for it? Right. And the first one, I already said that talent is another important part of this failure, because when you're not trained, your engineers are not trained, then you cannot. So personally, I know that because we have trained about 2,000 people in the last couple of years with our customer partners on the data science side, how to do science on the data basically. And the wonderful talent, because they know the domain well. So it's very easy for them to pick up. It just requires a different change in the mindset.
Thank you so much. So we have a couple more questions here, and they're all for Dr. Ruble. So I will, however, open them for anybody to answer as well. So the first one is, thanks so much for the great presentation, Dr. Anna. What factors do you think influence the social acceptance of AI?
Thank you for this question. AI is in a way not special with respect to social acceptance. It can be researched like any other technological innovation, and this happened to be an area of my research. I investigated social acceptance of different energy technologies, and most recently offshore wind that, for example, in the US, there's a goal of 30 gigawatts by 2030, but we still have less than 100 megawatts installed. So the way I'm thinking about social acceptance is, of course, a triangle, because the economists like visualizing things in triangles. It's a situation where you need to have market acceptance. So that our companies are implementing this, then policymakers should be accepting this technology. And for example, in a polarized world in the US, for some reason, this question of whether we should be installing this technology or the other technology is a political issue now. And finally, consumers. And there's another question that I saw in the chat, and I thought I would connect it there. It is clear that I'm talking from the US context, but there are also other countries in the world that might not be seeing AI or digital technologies as an affordable pathway. At the same time, it means that in the US, consumers might have a bigger role to play because the US consumers or consumers in developed countries do have the disposable income to be implementing these technologies like nests and other grid-connected technologies to, say, help balance the grid in time of congestion. So in that sense, in order to foster social acceptance, we need buy-in from all of these three actors, so markets, policymakers, and consumers. And I would argue that in the developing world, it's probably mostly the markets, because they're international companies present or national companies present, and they can define the frameworks, say, for the whole country. And often they have access to this technology and hopefully also support from policymakers. Now, how do I think about social acceptance is also a framework of two kinds of justice components. One is distributional justice, and the second one is procedural justice. So from distributional justice side, it's who gets paid for, say, for privacy. So in Arizona and in other parts of the US, utilities run some programs that for a small amount, relatively small, say $35 a year, a consumer allows the utility to adjust the thermostat by a certain number of Fahrenheit degrees. In many cases, the utility will never use that option. It's like an option value for the utility, but with recent extreme temperatures, this has actually been the case, that the thermostats have seen the consumers seen their temperatures climbing by a couple of degrees. So who should be paid, and obviously how much? Is $35 enough to compensate for this unpleasant experience? And procedural justice is who is at the table and who defines procedures. This can be implemented, this kind of thinking can be implemented when we're siting transmission lines or agreeing on what kinds of data will be available to homes. Dr. Satya mentioned the siloing and other components that definitely play into all of this.
I just want to add something general here. When we talk about data and we talk about sustainability in the energy sector, right? Oftentimes we just talk about green energy. We talk about like wind and solar, but actually when you think how digitalization can be used to monitor emissions, make exploration and production much more efficient and thereby more environmentally friendly, I always feel like there's too much of a dichotomy, and that it should be viewed more generally, that we should realize that this improves our lives and improves the environment throughout energy sectors, whether it's coal, whether it's oil, whether it's gas. It applies in so many places that I, for example, personally don't like the term green energy when we talk about sustainability, because I think there's so much to do, given that we still consume 78% fossil fuels, right? We need to consider everything. No, I'm not blaming anybody in our speakers. No, I just wanted to put that out there to bring in like some other perspective. But we have one or two more things. We have a question about developing countries that I would like to raise here. And also one remark I was going to make regarding Matt, who said that, that the countries in the GCC, not only the whole Middle East, he didn't say the whole Middle East. So he said in the GCC are of course benefiting from the current environment, but there are also those countries that are totally dependent on fossil fuel imports, like for example, Lebanon, 100% importing crude oil And so these countries are suffering enormously. And when you talk about the price, they suffer at least as much as, well, they don't have electricity, basically. They suffer as much as the Europeans, you know. So I just wanted to put that out there, that it's not the whole Middle East benefiting from the situation. And that's not what you said. We have here another question. In case of developing economies, how digitalization of energy sectors can help improve the standards of living of the most vulnerable population?
You know, I don't know whether we should really look at vulnerable or not, but general population, right? Digitalization, as I said, improves workflow for whichever aspect of it. So it will always benefit, right? Every time you do optimization or automation, it will actually reduce the cost for energy. And once you have really integrated, whenever that happens across the different energy sources, like call it an energy mix grid or something, then we'll certainly, everybody benefits from it. But you know, some of the things that I think Dr. Anna was just saying about the connectivity and all, one of the things which she was saying about how the meter can be controlled by and they give us $35, right, to reduce or increase the temperature. But for consumers, that's great, they're doing that. But what about industrial complexes? You know, I travel around the world and I go to most of the energy companies in the world, and in the peak of the summer, people are sitting with their sweaters on inside the building. So these are the people who will be leading the energy transition or the energy mix change. So in the peak of a summer, it doesn't matter which continent. I can tell you, for Middle East, you can come to Latin America, come to Asia or US.
You can come to Fairfax.
Exactly, right?
No, I mean, it's a couple of years back when I used to write my dissertation, the library was at 60 degrees and out or less, and outside was more than 100.
So is that $35 not a good enough benefit for these industrial complexes? Right. So we can talk about big things, but the implementation has to be done. And I think that's where data plays a big role. Now somebody can monitor in the peak of summer, your temperature in the building is 60 degrees. Does it really need to be?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, I agree with that. I just want to add to what Dr. Sachem's saying is habits are hard to break. And, you know, you can take a horse to water, but you can't teach it to drink. And, you know, a few things that I want to pick up on what you're saying. I totally agree that there is not enough investment in people in the energy sector. I have some friends who it's taken them 2 years to retire and they're physical oil traders, because talent simply is not coming through the energy space when it's coming to physical oil. It's, you know, people want to sit behind a screen and buy Bitcoin apparently, or whatever they want to do. There is a serious lack of investment. But it's a difficult one because the last 2 years have been eye-wateringly volatile. You know, if you say what happened with COVID, we went to negative oil price. I mean, if I say that now, I'd say I sound mad. The WTI oil prices went negative, and they did. And look, in a world that is clearly crying out for energy, US oil production is nowhere near as high as it was before COVID. And that's down to appetite and what those big US energy producers want to do in the States, which is strengthen balance sheet and give money back to the shareholders. The objective of a lot of energy companies has changed. But when we're talking about demand destruction, people's habits, you know, putting on a jumper and not putting on the heating. Look, we see by the end of Q1 next year, oil demand being at a record high, you know, and that is going to be on the back of feedstocks that were oil-based. I've got a couple of mates here. 2 years ago, they thought that they were going to be made redundant. They were coal traders. Now, you can't find a coal trader for love nor money. They don't exist anymore because they were never going to be replaced. But the world needs energy. The world needs, you know, it needs to turn the lights on when it needs it. And it's all been something that we've been extremely complacent about. But yeah, look, it's how data can add to that. It's transparency. It's a cost sensitive issue. You know, people want disposable income to not go on to go on holiday. But at the same time, they're not thinking about where they're going to get their energy from in 50 years. You know, I'm sure COP this week, I'm not sure much will come out of it. Certainly not as much as what happened in Glasgow in the last year. I hope there will be some enforcements or some, looking what's happened between now and then, but it's not a great deal because no one foresaw what's happened this year in Eastern Europe. And it's boiled down a lot of ignorance, perhaps a lot of market participants had, that we were so complacent on Russian gas and all those trade patterns have changed. You mentioned Lebanon, Isabella. I mean, the country is in economic ruin. It's, the exchange rate is awful. And I hope that everyone, I've got a lot of friends in Lebanon and we're always asking how they are, but, they need the energy, and who at the moment has more energy than they can sell? Well, that's Russia. So Russia is stepping in. They will look at places like Yemen, like Sri Lanka, Pakistan, places where a lot of people can't take the credit risk. And it does boil down to trading fundamentals. If they can make money out of it and it's a home for their oil, and it's Russian energy is not sanctioned by the UN. So places like South Africa and India, they can still import it. I told you this moral compass argument. Where does it sit on that? If you're an importer of energy, you go where the cheapest feedstock is. And it is that may sound crass, and I'm not being dismissive because of what's happened is awful, but you're running a balance sheet, you go where the cheapest form of energy is.
Yes, Matt, thank you so much for all these amazing insights. I think we're getting to an end. Does anybody still want to say something very, very important? I think we touched upon a lot of important issues. And I would like to thank my panelists. It was an amazing panel. And
Isabella, can I still chime in on the cost
yes,
side?
I thought you were saying bye.
No, I was like, yes, I'm raising my hand. So first of all, I wanted to mention that we are not in the energy transition. We're still in the phase of energy addition when the world is growing. And again, energy transition is something that policymakers like talking about. So it's pretty clear that we're still building a lot of fossil infrastructure, especially in developing Asia. So in that sense, there's a real dichotomy with what people like talking about and writing in the media versus what's happening. And the second part is that both of the speakers and Isabella mentioned the cost. And I believe that there is a problem with the way we're thinking about costs right now. Because if you look at LCOE, and I'm more of an electricity person, so let's just look at production of electricity right now. Solar is the king. That's what I said. Fatih Birol wrote a Financial Times op-ed about it a year and a half ago or so. So solar is the cheapest source of electricity. So at the same time, LCOE does not represent the real on-demand nature of technologies. And unless solar is paired with really, really good storage technologies, hopefully AI enabled in the future, or paired with hydrogen that can be also transported over longer distances. And finally, I feel like this discussion of costs is happening, and fossil fuel folks are talking past renewable energy folks, because renewable energy folks say, hey, but we're the cheapest, what's going on? And the fossil fuel folks is like, why do you still need subsidies then? So there is this fundamental misunderstanding of from both sides of these equations. And it means that if we talk about lowest cost technology, it doesn't necessarily mean LCOE. It's on the systems level.
I think thank you, Anna, for that pitch. And this is a topic where we could have a whole other webinar for. And when we think about sustainability, we should also, as a last word, we should also think more broadly, right? And in that case, when we want to be totally fair between all energy sources, we should also come up with life cycle analysis, right? And there we will see all kinds of true costs, and then we will not talk about the US layered, regulations in the electricity world, because that will give us the, topics for 10 more webinars. So I'd like to leave it there. I'm glad that we had, the renewable side, the oil sector, and everybody speaking out. And I think it was an exciting discussion. And I really want to thank you all. I've personally learned a lot from this webinar, and I hope our audience did too. And I thank them for tuning in as well. And with this, I give it back to Rebecca from IAEE.
IAEE wishes to thank Isabella Ruble and all of our speakers for an outstanding webinar. This webinar will be available on IAEE's website for future download. If you're not a member of IAEE, we encourage you to join by visiting www.iaee.org. We thank you for attending, and I officially close this webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.